Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This week, our guest is Bob Lloyd, and Bob is an attorney with Brown & Brown. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much, Gary.
So, Bob, tell us your story and kind of how you got started in the legal and insurance industry.
Sure. I kind of a circuitous route, as many people have said over the years. You don't start off graduating from college or high school and saying, gosh, I want to be an insurance professional. But, here I am 25 years later. I started I guess when I was in 8th grade, I put down in my yearbook that I wanted to be an attorney. And so that's, doctor, lawyer, whatever,
Right.
People figure those things out early on. When I graduated from law school, I had the opportunity to work for insurance companies and insurance brokerages, particularly Brown & Brown, and had the great fortune of coming back from law school and coming back to my hometown. Mm-hmm. And that's a rare thing in Florida. We often have people that graduate from high school and never look back.
Right.
And I've had a long career of 33 years in my hometown. So I started working for a law firm in private practice, doing litigation, commercial litigation.
Okay.
And then as I started working closer with Brown & Brown, I joined in 1999 and continued for a long period of time. I actually hung up my spurs from a legal standpoint, and I worked as an insurance agent. Got licensed in Florida and sold insurance and worked in the leadership in the sales office in Daytona Beach at the headquarters of the company. And then about 3 years into my tenure, I went back onto the legal side, but that experience can't be replaced. It gave me a perspective both on the sales and service side of the insurance business as a licensed insurance agent, and also as a licensed attorney, and sort of my risk-averse tendencies as an attorney. So I got a little bit of that perspective, from both vantage points, and that helped me for the last 25 years. And I have recently departed from Brown & Brown. And so I'm in sort of a new stage in my career looking for the next opportunity, and sort of look at the last 25 years and see how that parlays into risk management, consulting, and legal advice on the go forward.
Gotcha. So, you mentioned, the risk management. Can you tell us what risk management is? Because, you hear that term thrown around a lot, and risk mitigation and risk management, things like that. Can you tell our listeners what that really means?
Yeah, I think when we talk about risk in business, particularly, all business, there's risk. And if you're not taking risks, if you're not recognizing those risks, then you're not going to be in business long. And I think it's important when we talk about risk management, it isn't some kind of mysterious or very arcane or academic discussion. It's basically, looking at things that could affect your business, and what could cause your business to be impaired substantially or put you out of business. And, what are those risks? How do you evaluate those risks? And what do you do with those risks? And so I often talk about it like, this isn't about selling insurance. This isn't all about risk transfer and how to hustle sales and in insurance, and how to cede that risk to some other party, an insurance company or risk bearer. Oftentimes, risk management is about looking at different risks and deciding which risks are going to be retained and how you're going to manage those risks without insurance involved, and which risks you're looking at to say, look, I can't afford to retain that risk. If something went wrong, if this situation occurred, it would be, kind of an extinction event. And so therefore, I'm going to look at it, an insurance product, as a way to mitigate or manage that risk. So risk management really is the way we look at these different risks that affect our businesses and decide, which are we going to keep and which are we going to pass on to someone else.
Right. So what are some of the risks that you would insure for?
So, those types of risks that you look at the ones that are the most significant from a business standpoint, which are going to put you out of business, and how do you deal with those? And so, for instance, you start with, if you're a solo practitioner, or you're a small business and you are dependent on key people, let's say you're in a consulting business, you would look at that business and say, well, you've got payroll, you've got people that are depending on you. Maybe life insurance is one of the key things to have. So key person life insurance for somebody in that perspective. Or you produce products and you have a business location and all of your operations are located at that principal place of business. The simple things, what it really, from the very beginnings of insurance in the US particularly, fire might be, a fire that burns down your business will put you out. You're done. But there are so many different kinds of perils out there. You got to identify what those perils are and what would happen if you had that type of loss to your business and your ability to continue on in your operations. So that's kind of what we look at. You look at the peril, you estimate the probability and the severity of the loss that could occur, and then you decide whether you would insure for that, whether you want to cede that risk to a risk bearer instead of retaining it.
What are some of the risks that you would say that are for a business owner that typically you wouldn't insure for, that as a business owner you would take that responsibility?
Well, some of those risks might have to do with, for instance, business locations. If you're, for instance, you work in remote locations and are really not dependent on a physical office space. And we learned a lot during the pandemic, that, for instance, pandemic exposure was typically not insurable. And a lot of business owners found out the hard way when the pandemic descended upon them, that they were not able to insure for the losses associated with the pandemic. But many business owners understood that and knew about that, and frankly, thrived during the pandemic because they had built a business model that retained that risk for the pandemic, and they worked around it through technology or through other means so that their business could continue to operate, similar to yours, Gary. When we talk about this podcast, it's a great idea of continuing in your business and not letting the pandemic put you out, and operating in a model that didn't accommodate for that kind of risk.
Yeah, in your experience over the years, what are some, I'm going to say, mistakes that the business owners have made when they haven't, really managed that risk or didn't insure things that they should have insured instead of taking the risk all on their own?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times business owners, they're focused so much on the premium, the cost of the insurance. Instead of focusing on what the coverage is that they're procuring and what the potential risk is that they're mitigating. And, if it, how much it's a difference between cost and value.
Right.
So you look at a premium and you say, well, it costs too much. Well, what is the value of that premium that you're paying? Because if it's protecting the business from an extinction event, in the event of a peril, then the value is there. It's just, hey, look, that's what you have to do. It's sort of like you don't just say, well, I disagree with paying taxes, so I'm not going to pay taxes. I mean, the exposure is too great.
Yeah.
And it's you really just have to look at it that way. So I'll give you an example. Some businesses in particular in the property field, they'll insure for their building and they'll pay their property insurance for the location and everything else, but they don't think about business interruption and extra expense. For instance, if they had a loss and were not able to operate for a period of time because of the loss. And all of a sudden it's like, how do you make payroll? How do you keep your employees? How do you keep the business operating while you're being repaired in the event of a loss? So we've had these experiences out there, and I could give a couple of stories, but one where a manufacturing facility was destroyed in an explosion, a fire, and they were out, they were covered in excess of $6 million for the repair of the business. But what was it going to take when they don't have business interruption coverage, business income and extra expense coverage to keep their employees, to make payroll, to operate the business while it is being literally repaired from the ground up? Right. And so, that's a real life example of a coverage that, oftentimes businesses don't think about. They're covered for the fire, or they're covered for the windstorm, or they're covered for whatever it might be out there, these perils that are identifiable and understandable. It's these intangibles sometimes they just don't think about. Like you're expecting that right hook and then you get the left uppercut. And
Right.
It's making sure that you kind of evaluated all of that, like what if scenarios. Go through a tabletop exercise and talk to your team about, have we thought about this the right way? And amazingly, you will get sort of scenarios that, they scratch your head and say, I didn't think about that. It's like people who buy the windstorm coverage, and so they feel like they're all set, for the wind exposure that might come in with a hurricane. And then guess what? They don't buy flood coverage.
Right.
And so when they get a flood issue, they were like, gosh, didn't see that one coming. You never want to be in that position as a business owner where you just said, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah. I think, talking about the pandemic, that's one that insurance didn't cover. Unless you had your own, captive insurance company or a special policy type thing, that wasn't covered. What did you see, or what do you see coming in the future from the insurance world side of things on this? Because yes, we had PPP loans and there were some other grants and stuff like that, but some people didn't qualify because their income wasn't down enough, but they still were majorly affected by this. So do you see there in the insurance world, you see that there's going to be some type of a policy that's going to cover that type of thing going forward?
I don't know whether we'll see that. Actually, this test, it was, a great, I think, test during the pandemic. And, unfortunately, it didn't work for a lot of businesses. This was a terrible thing, and it was a surprise to them that all of a sudden they don't have coverage for this pandemic exposure. But, I can't remember the exact year, but when the SARS issue arose, and that was when insurers really started to figure out it was a peril that you probably could not pay enough premium to cover the exposure. And so from an underwriting standpoint, it became untenable. And so, it's similar to what happened after 9/11, where the government had to step in and provide a solution through TRIA. When you look at the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, it basically replaced private available insurance with a public solution because the exposure was just too great.
Right.
And so, you look at the pandemic and what happened there, the exclusions were put in policies for a number of years. And so they've been in policies well before the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what happened of course, as these things go, usually they all get tested in court. And the large majority of the cases all across the country have, basically upheld the exclusions of coverage. And so they were clearly disclosed, and this is what's happening. So where are we now? Can we reasonably expect another pandemic event in the future? And I think the answer is, if history is prologue, we will have another event at some point in the future. And, I think if there's going to be a solution, it's going to end up being a public-private solution. Mm-hmm. I don't think that you're going to see the industry jumping in, especially after the experience with COVID-19, to provide a private sector solution for pandemic risk.
Yeah, I think that, again, everybody wants to blame everybody else. And I think that that's one of those things where, you talk about, as a business owner, okay, we need to decide what risk are we willing to take and what do we want to insure so somebody else is taking that risk for us.
That's right.
You talked about sitting down with your team of people to talk about, hey, where are we maybe have some shortfalls and stuff like that. I mean, there's certain things that by law you're required to have workman's comp insurance and things like that, but there's stuff that you're not required by law to have. And I think those are the things that you're talking about. Hey, these are the things that we need to decide if we want to take that risk or not. When we sit down with our team and come up with, hey, here's our list of things that we're worried about. Do you then suggest to sit down with your insurance agent to talk about those things to see if they are insurable?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think it's helpful to have those conversations, and don't treat the insurance process, treat it like holistically for your business. Don't treat it like you're going to go to the drive-through window and buy your insurance products once a year and forget about them until the loss event occurs. And so use your insurance agent as an opportunity to bounce ideas, to think about risk, to talk about it, not necessarily the product. The product may be part of the solution, but talk about risk in the business and what potential insurance products might be out there that would help mitigate those risks, and whether it makes sense to retain those risks. And so a lot of times it's a balance of both. So we look at deductibles and self-insured retentions as a way of balancing that. So you can balance the premium by retaining more of the risk. You might not be able to handle a $500,000 loss, but you could certainly handle maybe a $5,000 retention, self-insured retention, or even $1 million self-insured retention. If your business can handle certain types of things, it's a toggling of what you're going to retain versus what you're going to cede. And I think your agent or broker should be your trusted advisor in helping you work through that. And I'll give you an example through the pandemic, where I think it takes that kind of tabletop discussion, really looking at things and looking at the perils that affect businesses. So, I just mentioned an example where a lot of businesses got technology platforms to make sure that they didn't have physical locations that would be damaged from the pandemic risk.
Right.
And so they mitigated their risk by changing their business model. Maybe it was hybrid, maybe it was full-time work remotely, but whatever. And so maybe that reduced their property exposure. So all of a sudden their property, the peril of losses from property decreased substantially because they were able to do these things remotely in their business. There's another risk, though. If you're becoming that dependent on technology, have you thought about cyber liability coverage? So what happens if your business all of a sudden got hacked and you had ransomware on your system and it shuts down your technology solution that saved you from this other property risk? So it's sort of looking at where the business is going and what you're dependent on as a business to operate, and looking at if there are certain insurance products that can help mitigate that kind of exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that that's something that's super important with everything that's that's happening now with the cyber crimes and stuff like that. I mean, because you have these big billion-dollar companies that are being hacked. You think that a small guy can't be hacked too, and depending on the information you have, and sometimes it's just somebody that's out there that's just trying to dig through stuff, and they find you, and okay, hey, I can make a little bit of money off of this. I think that going back and talking with your agent and stuff like that, I don't want to necessarily call it an audit, but kind of auditing my policies to make sure that, do I really truly have the coverage that I think I have? Because I think sometimes, and even going back to, homeowners policies and stuff like that, you think, oh, I have, sewer backup and flood and all this stuff. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. How do you feel, how often should somebody sit down with their agent to kind of go through this process with them?
Well, I think from a business standpoint, and it might be different from a homeowner's perspective, personal lines versus, looking at business insurance. But I think, from a risk management perspective, I think it should be a regular event. And I might be pushing it a little bit because of my background, and
Right.
I think it's an ongoing process. And so, at least monthly from my perspective is the way that we look at it. But, perhaps more realistically for most businesses, it's quarterly. But look at your quarterly results, look at where you're going, look at, warning signs out there. And so, it's those kinds of things that, look at what's happening, pay attention to what's happening in the news, and ask yourself, if this risk affected my business or my location, geographic location, how would we be able to respond? Would we have the right types of coverage in place? And too often it's sort of like visiting the dentist. Nobody looks forward to it, and so you're trying to convince people to sit down with their agent and discuss risk and their exposures, and a lot of people, it's like, look, I just don't want to deal with it until I absolutely have to. It's sort of this compulsory purchasing process that they have to go through, and they put it off as long as they can, and go through the process, and hold their nose, cut the check for the premium, and then forget about it. And I think that's a dangerous way to handle insurance for your business. It's really, the rubber meets the road when you have a loss. Yeah. And so, nobody really wants to talk about insurance until, they have that loss. And then all of a sudden it's right in front of them. And you never want to have those white knuckle moments where you're just, I hope the coverage works the way I think it's supposed to work.
Right.
It's best to have those discussions in advance. And again, call your agent, and it's not just at renewal time, it's throughout the year. And if you have a question, call make sure you understand those risks and how your insurance is going to respond, and not just at the time of loss.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, you talk about, the cost of premiums and stuff like that. And I think it kind of goes across the board. I mean, I run into that many times with our fees of what we're charging, somebody. And I try to explain to them, it's like, look, this is an investment that you're making in your business. You need to look at this more, not as so much as an expense, but look at it more as, okay, this is almost like an asset that I'm buying, and that it's going to make sure that I don't have that big substantial financial loss that I would have if I wasn't insured properly.
Exactly right. I mean, it's again, you pay now or pay later. How much are you investing in your time and your blood, sweat, and tears in your business to develop it and grow it, and you deal with the day-to-day operational issues, and it's a struggle. It's frustrating. How much are you willing to spend to protect that from just evaporating? And it's really, that's we are, as a nation, the U.S. is the most insured economy in the world, and when we look at that, that's it's again a testament to the fact that we're building something substantial, and we're building it for the long haul, and that's why people have faith in the U.S. economy. So hey, it's been a rough go here, but inflationary pressures, all the things that are happening in the macro economy, don't let that affect what you're willing to do to protect your business for the long haul as well. So it's not just an annual conversation. This is it's a multi-year thing, and so at least once a year, at renewal or otherwise, take that assessment of the potential perils, what kinds of risks are out there that would be extinction events, some that might be moderately impactful, so they'd be harmful, but not an extinction event. And then what ones are inhibiting, would sort of trip you up, but not really cause you a substantial loss. And then you kind of pick which you're going to retain and which you're going to insure, which are mandated by the government, like workers' compensation coverage, and which are again optional, and whether you want to retain some of that risk or cede it to a risk bearer.
Right. And I think it's important also, as you're going through this process, like you're saying, even if it's only annually, but as your business grows, the amount of coverage that you need to have may go up also. And if you're just signing the check and sending that in when you get your renewal, you may be underinsured also.
Exactly. And again, it's that horrifying discussion that you're going to have at the time of loss, where you're trying to figure out all of a sudden co-insurance penalties, things that creep up maybe in a policy that you really didn't pay attention to at the time you bound the policy. And at time of loss, it's too late. And so many of us here in Florida, and I am included in this discussion, when the storm is in the box,
yeah,
and it's rolling towards Florida, that's not the time to get out the homeowner's policy and start looking through to see if you've got all the things that you think are covered in there. And I'll tell you, from a homeowner's perspective, how many of us take a photograph or some kind of record of personal property in your home, and you accumulate artwork, or you accumulate jewelry, or you accumulate a lot of things over the years, and you haven't updated your personal property schedules and your homeowners, and it's like you don't think about it, you don't want to think about it, and then when there's that storm rolling in, everybody's thinking about it, and you're grabbing a couple of things to take with you your phone charger, your pets, whatever, and your
Right.
homeowner's insurance policy, and hoping that it covers everything that might be exposed to loss.
Right. Right. So Bob, we've covered a lot of stuff. I think that the listeners are going to get a lot out of this, and looking at it from a business perspective. What have I not asked you that you wish I had?
Wow, good question. I think that you touched on one thing, and it's like, when do you get involved with your insurance agent or professional? I think, as a lawyer, as an insurance agent, I think sometimes it's kind of like a doctor. You only go to them when you really need them.
Right.
And remember, if you're paying your premiums every year and you've got a trusted relationship with that lawyer or that insurance agent, go to them and seek the advice, and not just at time of loss, or for an insurance agent at the time of renewal. Really lean on your trusted advisors, to help you through these kinds of questions, especially in the commercial and business context. I think that's critically important. And don't just don't go to them when you're just when you're running a fever.
Right.
I think that's an important point to make.
I think that's a great point there. We always preach, you got to have the right team for the right plan, and to build your team of professionals that you talk to on a regular basis, being your attorney, your insurance broker, your CPA, your financial advisor, your retirement specialist, and on and on. But you have to build that team of people to be able to talk, and also let them talk to each other, to be able to make sure, because sometimes, I may, from the tax side of things, I may think of something from a business standpoint that, hey, if you lose this, you're going to, you got that one big customer that 75% of your business is with. And what happens if they go out of business or you lose the contract with them? That's not insured. What do you need to do? And then talk to the broker about, okay, how can we get this covered? So I think that's why it's so important to when you're saying team, I'm looking at it not just your internal team, but your external team of advisors also.
Absolutely right. And we've always joked about, I got an app for that.
Right.
When we talk about our smartphones, and there's an app for that. You'd be surprised at how many insurance products are out there to cover certain exposures, that many business owners don't even think there's coverage for that. And
right.
Guess what? Yeah, there's a product for that. There's an app for that.
Right.
And so let's figure out how to make those solutions and take a little bit of that burden, and that give you a little bit of, call it sleep at night insurance. Your ability to rest and understand that your assets are protected and your business is safe.
Right. So, Bob, if people like what they hear and they want to talk to you more, maybe they have an issue that they have going on, or they want to just talk more about, the risk management side of things, how can they reach out to you?
Well, I'd say the best way is to find me on LinkedIn. I've got a pretty active profile on LinkedIn. Look for me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to start at this point. And so while I'm kind of in transition with my career at Brown & Brown and what's next, I'd say find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I post a ton of material and would be happy to follow up with anyone who has any kind of inquiries through LinkedIn.
Okay, great. I really appreciate your time. I know I've learned a lot today from our discussion. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Gary.
All right. This week, our guest was Bob Lloyd, and he is a risk management specialist and attorney. I will see you guys next week.
49 faces look to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.